It's one of the most alarming insects most people will ever encounter in their own backyard. A wasp nearly 2 inches long, with a thick, powerful-looking black and yellow body, patrolling low over your lawn in slow, deliberate loops, occasionally dive-bombing toward the ground or toward a person standing nearby with a speed and directness that feels unmistakably like an attack. For many people, the first encounter with this insect triggers genuine panic, and in recent years, that panic has only intensified thanks to widespread, largely inaccurate comparisons circulating online between this specific wasp and the genuinely dangerous Asian hornet, sensationalized in media coverage under the name murder hornet. A comparison that has led an enormous number of people to assume the massive wasp patrolling their own lawn represents a similarly serious threat. Here's what you actually need to know before reaching for a spray can. This wasp is not hunting you, has essentially no interest in stinging a human under nearly any circumstance, and the low, dive-bombing flight pattern that looks so threatening is, in the overwhelming majority of cases, either territorial posturing between males with no sting capability at all, or a female completely preoccupied with a hunting mission that has nothing whatsoever to do with you. Today, we're going to properly identify exactly what this insect is, explain why its intimidating size and behavior mask a genuinely low-risk, ecologically valuable reality, and reveal what it's actually hunting, a target considerably more specific and considerably more impressive than most people would ever guess. The wasp described above is almost certainly a cicada killer, most commonly the eastern cicada killer, Sphaecia speciosus, one of the largest wasp species found across much of the United States, and despite its genuinely intimidating size, a species belonging to a category entomologists refer to as solitary wasps, fundamentally different in both biology and behavior from the social, colony-based wasps covered in an earlier video on this channel discussing paper wasp nests. This distinction matters enormously for understanding the behavior you're actually observing. Unlike a paper wasp or yellowjacket colony, which is covered in that earlier video, defends a shared nest collectively, and can mobilize numerous workers in response to a perceived threat, a cicada killer operates entirely independently. Each female cicada killer constructs and defends her own individual burrow without any colony structure, worker caste, or collective defense system whatsoever, meaning there is no coordinated swarm response of the kind people rightfully fear from a disturbed yellowjacket or hornet nest, since a cicada killer, by definition, has no colony to summon in the first place. The specific size that makes this species so alarming on encounter, females typically reaching 1.5 to 2 inches in length, is also directly connected to its solitary hunting lifestyle, since we'll cover shortly that considerable size and strength are specifically adapted to subdue and transport prey considerably larger and heavier than the wasp herself, a physical requirement that simply doesn't apply to smaller, colony-based wasp species relying on collective effort rather than individual hunting power. Here's the detail that resolves most of the alarming dive-bombing people actually witness, and it directly parallels a similar biological fact covered in the earlier video on this channel. As with bees, only female wasps possess a functional stinger at all, since the sting organ in all stinging Hymenoptera species is evolutionarily derived from the female reproductive structure, meaning male wasps, including male cicada killers, are entirely and completely incapable of stinging any circumstances whatsoever, regardless of how aggressively they behave. And male cicada killers behave very aggressively indeed, but for reasons entirely unrelated to any threat toward humans. Male cicada killers establish and defend individual territories around areas where females are likely to emerge or nest, engaging in near-constant patrol flight, low, fast loops over their claimed territory, and will readily dive-bomb, chase, and even physically collide with intruders, including other male cicada killers, pets, and yes, humans who happen to walk through their territory, all in an effort to defend their claimed space and improve their chances of encountering and mating with a receptive female. This means the specific dive-bombing behavior for triggering genuine fear in people encountering cicada killers is, in the majority of documented cases, coming from an individual physically incapable of stinging at all, engaged in territorial display behavior, while genuinely startling and occasionally physically bumping into a person carries no sting risk whatsoever. A detail that specifically point to when addressing widespread cicada killer anxiety, since the aggressive, threatening behavior and the actual sting capability turn out to belong to two different, easily distinguishes of the same species. Female cicada killers do possess a functional stinger, unlike the males discussed above, But understanding her actual behavior and priorities explains why documented stinging incidents involving this specific species remain genuinely rare despite its large size and widespread presence across much of the country. A female cicada killer's stinger, unlike the defensive stinger of a social species like a yellowjacket, evolved primarily as a hunting tool rather than a defensive weapon, specifically adapted to deliver a precisely targeted, paralyzing venom to her prey, a purpose covered in more detail in the next section, rather than as a rapid response defense mechanism against perceived the way a colony defending social wasp sting has evolved to function. This distinction in evolutionary purpose directly into behavior entirely focused on the demanding, time-sensitive hunting, subduing, and transporting lark to her burrow, generally shows minimal interest in humans nearby and requires considerable direct physical provocation, actual grabbing or again, for example, before resorting to a defensive sting, compared to the far more readily triggered defensive risk documented in social wasp species actively protecting a shared colony and brood. Entomologists who study this species specifically describe cicada killers as remarkably docile toward humans under normal circumstances, with documented stinging incidents overwhelmingly limited to direct physical handling or accidental contact, such as stepping barefoot directly onto an individual, rather than the kind of proximity-triggered defensive stinging people reasonably fear from social wasp species. Even in the rare cases where a sting does occur, medical literature on cicada killer stings generally describes the resulting pain and reaction as comparable to or milder than a typical honeybee sting, considerably less severe than commonly reported for many social wasp species. Now, for the genuinely impressive behavior actually responsible for this species name, and the primary occupation actually consuming a cicada killer's attention during the exact weeks she's most visible patrolling your lawn, an activity that has absolutely nothing to do with you or any pet in the vicinity. As the name suggests, female cicada killers hunt cicadas, specifically large, robust insects that, covered in a different context in an earlier video on this channel discussing the extended underground life cycles certain cicada species display, represent genuinely substantial prey, often comparable in size and weight to the hunting wasp herself, sometimes larger. Locating and successfully subduing prey of this size represents one of the more remarkable predatory feats documented among solitary hunting wasps generally. Upon locating a cicada, typically detected while the cicada rests on tree branch, the female cicada engage in a swift aerial attack, grappling with prey that can weigh as much or more than she does, and delivering a precisely targeted sting that paralyzes the cicada almost immediately without killing it outright, a critical distinction that ensures the prey remains fresh, rather than decaying, throughout the time it will spend provisioning her developing offspring. She then faces the genuinely physical task of transporting this paralyzed, often oversized prey back to her burrow, a task frequently requiring her to climb a nearby tree trunk with the cicada beneath her, then glide downward toward her entrance using gravity to offset the combined weight. Since sustained flight while carrying prey is often beyond her direct flying capability alone, a genuinely resourceful solution researchers studying this species have specifically documented and described in detail. Once safely delivered to her burrow, a network of tunnels she excavates in sandy, well-drained soil, often the same open, sunny patches of lawn or garden bed favored by the ground-nesting bee species discussed in earlier videos on this channel. The female cicada killer places the paralyzed cicada into one of several into-brood cells branching off from the main tunnel, laying a single egg direct to the still-living, paralyzed prey before sealing that specific chamber and moving on to hunt and provision additional cells nearby. The larva that hatches from this egg feeds directly on the paralyzed cicada over the following days and weeks, consuming the provisioned prey entirely before pupating within the same underground chamber, and eventually, as an adult the following summer, completing a life cycle timed specific inside with the seasonal emergence of the cicada species she depends on for successful reproduction. A level of ecological synchronization researchers studying predator-prey timing relationships have specifically documented across the cicada killer's range. This single-minded, demanding provisioning process, subduing and transporting prey considerably larger than herself, repeated multiple times to provision several separate brood cells, represents the entirely exhausting focus of a female cicada killer's brief adult lifespan. A focus that leaves essentially no attention, motivation, or evolutionary reason to direct any aggression toward the humans walking nearby on the same lawn she's using as hunting and nesting territory. Beyond the low sting risk covered above, there's a genuine ecological and even practical lawn care benefit connected to cicada killer burrows, specifically worth understanding before deciding whether to treat their presence as a problem requiring removal. Cicada killer burrowing activity, similar in principle to the ant colony soil aeration discussed in earlier videos on this channel, contributes to loosening and aerating lawn and garden soil, improving drainage and water penetration in the specific areas where burrows are concentrated. And critically, by actively hunting and removing cicadas from the surrounding area, cicada killer, natural form of population regulation for an insect that, in significant numbers, can itself cause measurable stress to trees and woody plants through the egg-laying process female cicadas use, meaning a healthy local cicada killer population can provide a meaningful, entirely natural check on cicada population pressure in a given area without requiring any chemical intervention at all. Since cicada killers are solitary rather than colonial, individual burrows also don't expand into the kind of large, persistent, ever-growing colony structure discussed in earlier videos covering social wasp nests and ant colonies. A cluster of cicada killer burrows in a particularly well-drained section of lawn typically represents multiple individual females taking advantage of similarly favorable nesting conditions in close proximity, rather than a single expanding colony, and burrow activity in a given location often naturally declines from year to year as favorable nesting conditions, such as consistently bare or thin turf, are altered by other lawn care practices or natural vegetation changes over time. To remain balanced and accurate, as with the earlier videos on this channel covering wasp nests and bat roosts, it's worth acknowledging the specific circumstances where some level of intervention is a reasonable response rather than insisting cicada killers should always simply be left entirely undisturbed regardless of context. A genuinely dense concentration of burrows in a high-traffic area, such as directly within a walkway, a children's play area, or immediately beside a frequently used entrance, may reasonably warrant some form of management, primarily to the likelihood of repeated male territorial dive-bombing encounters, which, while harmless, can be genuinely startling and unwelcome for individuals in that specific location repeatedly throughout the peak activity season. Individuals with a known wasp or bee sting allergy should also apply some more caution around any concentrated burrow area, given the small but non-zero possibility of direct contact with a female, even though documented reactions from this specific species tend to be milder than from social wasp stings, as covered earlier. In these specific cases, rather than broad chemical treatment across an entire lawn area, targeted management, such as improving lawn density and moisture retention in the specific bare, sandy patches cicada killers prefer for nesting, since like several ground nesting insects discussed in earlier videos, they specifically favor open, sparsely vegetated soil, tends to be a more effective, less disruptive long-term approach than attempting to eliminate individual burrows directly. If you've identified cicada killer activity on your own lawn, here's a practical, proportionate response. Step 1. Confirm the identification, distinguishing it clearly from the genuinely dangerous species it's frequently confused with online. Cicada killers display a distinct reddish-brown and thorax with a black abdomen and marked by pale yellow bands, a color pattern and overall body shape distinctly different from the Asian hornet responsible for the hornet comparisons. A species that, as of current entomological reporting, remains extremely limited in its confirmed range within North America, and is not the insect the overwhelming majority of people encountering a large wasp on their own lawn are actually looking at. Step 2. Recognize that dive-bombing behavior, however alarming, is very likely coming from a stingless mage in normal territorial display, and simply continue about your activity in the yard, since direct physical contact, not mere proximity, is what actually carries any sting risk at all, and even that risk applies only to females. Step 3. Leave individual burrows undisturbed in lower traffic areas of your lawn, recognizing the genuine soil aeration and natural cicada population regulation benefits covered above. Step 4. If burrow concentration in a high-traffic area genuinely warrants management, focus on improving lawn density and soil moisture in that specific location rather than broad chemical treatment. addressing the underlying bare soil conditions that attracted nesting activity in the first place. Step 5. If you have a known sting allergy, simply exercise reasonable additional caution around any visibly active burrow area, avoiding direct handling or barefoot walking through concentrated nesting zones specifically, a sensible precaution regardless of how genuinely low the overall species-wide sting risk happens to be. The genuinely intimidating wasp patrolling your lawn in slow, deliberate loops, or occasionally startling you with a sudden, fast dive, is, once you understand her actual biology, considerably less concerned with you than her size and behavior suggest. She is either a male entirely incapable of stinging, combed by territorial competition that has nothing to do with humans at all, or a female so completely focused on the demanding, genuinely impressive task of hunting and subduing prey larger than herself that a human standing nearby barely registers as relevant to her at all. Understanding this doesn't just resolve a common source of backyard anxiety. It reveals one of the more genuinely remarkable predator-prey relationships happening in plain sight across countless lawns every summer. An outsized, formidable-looking hunter whose entire brief adult life is dedicated to a single-minded pursuit that, however dramatic it looks from the outside, was never actually about you at all. Have you ever encountered a cicada killer and assumed it was something far more dangerous than it actually is? Did the size alone convince you to keep your distance? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes your stories become the subject of the next video. And if you've ever wondered what another small creature quietly living in your yard actually knows about your world, I think the next video might surprise you just as much as this one did. Until then, keep watching, keep wondering, and never stop paying attention to the small things.